Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast, where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Today, our guest is Dr. Jake Beniflah, Executive Director of the Center for Multicultural Science. Dr. Jake, always good to have you back. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your work at the center and journal and anything else you're working on.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you doing this for the community and our industry, and I'd be happy to just kind of give folks a 60-second view, bird's eye view of what we've done at the center. I've got about 15 years of consulting experience in the ad business, and kind of left it right after finishing my doctorate in 2010. I've been running the Center for Multicultural Science for about 10 years. I'm running it, I'm leading it, and essentially I built it as a multicultural marketing research think tank where we conduct research, most of which has been partnering with you and Magna on the media side. So I really appreciate your support and the work that you've done for me and for everyone who consumes and uses your consumer research. In 2015, we launched an academic journal, knowing that there was a gap in where we codify and how we codify our research. So I thought that was really an important part, an important piece to the puzzle, if you will. And about 2 years ago, I started thinking about what was next for us, and data science was that. And so we partnered with DASCA. Which is an association in data science, and so they're well known. They're globally well known, and we built an accelerator to help represent the underrepresented in data science. So we see data science and data analytics obviously as the new mainstream, if you will, from a marketing standpoint. A lot of it is data driven as opposed to conceptually driven things, and a lot of the work I think that we're doing and going to do will help clients across the board be, more effective in a new mainstream.
That's awesome. And always love hearing about the work you're doing. You're always pushing the conversation forward. So appreciate that. And, kind of crazy times right now. I wanted to have you on. We're week 5 into quarantine here in LA.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking about, I've been writing a little bit and having some conversations, but I wanted to have you on to talk more about, how you see this COVID-19 affecting multicultural marketing. Where is it moving? I mean, we've had some good momentum, I think, as an industry, of course, always things that could be improved upon. But given everything that's happening, I mean, society, and then trickle down into marketing research. I mean, how do you see COVID-19 affecting multicultural marketing, kind of from your perspective now that we've been in it for over a month?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think, I wish I had the crystal ball in front of me and tell you exactly what I expect, expect to happen. One way to look at COVID-19 is no different than looking at the current environment as a recession, right? Whether it's a war or it's a virus. If clients pull back, it's going to hurt demand. And if demand's hurt, supply is hurt. And if supply is hurt, then the marketing and the advertising pulls back. We've seen very different approaches by brands. P&G has doubled down, saying, okay, you know what, this is a time for us to sort of be at the top of mind for folks, and kind of take the bullet in the short term, and then think that all of the work that they're doing now will benefit them in the long run. And then you've got a company like Coca-Cola who says, we're going to go dark. We're just going to pull back, weather the storm, and see what happens. And here you have really two major leading brands, right? Global brands take very different approaches. And so I don't know who is, who's right and who's wrong. I can only say that, from a brand standpoint, they both see the world very differently, right? So, I think that this is a recession if you want to look at it from that standpoint. And I think that, what marketers do should parallel what marketers do in recessionary times. You can look at it now as purely from a COVID-19 standpoint, which is, look, the way that we interact with brands is really different. And perhaps the role of brands, the role of a brand is much broader than just a place to buy and a product to consume, or a service to consume, right? So, I see these brands having to redefine themselves in some way. Let me just make sure that we're on here. I think these brands have to redefine themselves and find what their essence is, what their purpose is, as opposed to just saying, "Hey, look, we're a product, and consumers are going to use us 5 times a day," or whatever it is, right? So I think a lot of these brands.
It's a super interesting idea. I really like this idea about that you brought up, which I think is very true, especially now. And we're looking at this from the perspective. I don't think this. Hopefully, when this is published, we're out of quarantine. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking about it, from the stay-at-home. Brands now have an outsized influence or an outsized role in our lives, given kind of the limited mobility that we have, right?
Yeah. That's right. I mean, and I think that's, you've seen some of these companies struggle, because they're thinking on their feet. The ones that are best prepared for this did well, and those that were, didn't have the infrastructure, didn't have the people, didn't know how to evolve, did something, and others didn't do anything at all. So, I think this is a learning moment for a lot of CMOs and a lot of organizations in general, because there will be another COVID-19, and maybe worse, maybe not. The restrictions may not be so severe. I kind of feel like this was the first time that we have been under this sort of viral attack, if you will, globally. And so we went from being completely open to being completely closed. And so there's going to be a lot of learnings here, and there might be a lot of different approaches moving forward. And it may be less centralized, and I think it might be more decentralized. In other words, focus on New York and focus on the hot spots, and have those cities locked down, as opposed to having the entire country locked down. Where in my city, Manhattan Beach, here in California, has 60 cases, right, in a population base of 35,000. So, I think my city would have weathered the storm with being open and everything else, right? So I think there's some kind of legislative impact coming out of this. Will be some kind of decompressing, if you will, on what people have done well and not. But I think brands in general will have to evolve and find what that right message is in these moments, right? Because nobody wants to buy, I don't know, a car, right, when you can't move, or I don't know, beans or chips or whatever the product is. I think that the message has to fit the context, and I think brands have to think about that more and more, given that I think this is going to be the new normal.
I agree. And one of the things I've been thinking about is what's been interesting to me as a researcher is we're all going through this globally, and social media has given us a glimpse into how each country and in turn how each culture has responded, right? So like Italians, I don't know if you've seen kind of the social media of them, singing and playing music on balconies and whatnot, despite being hit the hardest, right? Mm-hmm. Versus how South Korea is dealing with it versus how the U.S. is. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about the U.S. Because we are a multicultural society. Yeah. How in times of crisis, we kind of we rely on our cultural DNA and how we respond. I mean, every culture responds differently, just like we're seeing it play out on social media. And it made me think about how brands right now, I mean, there's a lot of brands like that. We're all in this together. I mean, everything, every commercial seems to blend together. But from my perspective, I'm like, if here's an opportunity like the P&Gs of the world that are investing in marketing, that do understand this outsized role that brands now play in our lives. And, you have an opportunity now to make real connections with people outside of just a purchase decision. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is there an opportunity for brands to kind of culturally connect, given how we all respond differently to crisis
Yeah.
from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and I think the way that all those images that you saw on social media, I saw, and I was actually not pleasantly surprised, but kind of on a happy side. I was happy to see the Italians, serenading each other basically in concert on balconies. I thought that was really collectivistic and very unique. With that said, I also wrote a piece just in response to another article that was published, and I published it on LinkedIn. But I essentially said, look, this country, our response will be dictated, if not influenced at the very least, by our cultural values. And so Americans don't take, their freedoms lightly. In fact, you take away a freedom, whatever that freedom may be, freedom to do whatever they want, to move out, to break the quarantine, to own guns, to whatever that freedom is, they take it very seriously. So I knew it at some point. The quarantine would be fed up. Americans would be fed up with the quarantine restrictions. It's like you've taken. It's not just the economy anymore. It's like now you're talking about my values. Now, like the government is not going to tell me what to do, no matter how unreasonable and illogical that may sound. For those that are looking at it through a different lens, they see it as really relevant. So I think that your discussion around values, cultural values, and consumer behavior and the way people respond through COVID-19 is very relevant. The question to me as a brand is, what is that cultural DNA? And I don't think it's really at a high level anymore. I mean, a brand has to know their target audience from an inside out, from the bottom up, right? And so when they're developing a message, they're coming from the top down. But that top down approach has to align with the bottom up approach. And so we're not talking about, Hispanic values and African American values. There's got to be, there's got to be a set of values, a set of DNA strands that transcends everyone, because we're going through the same thing, and now that's the commonality. And so what role does the brand play when you're looking at it from that perspective? This is not for vertical efforts, right? COVID-19 affects all of us. What does that mean? It's just like the automotive company saying, hey, we're going through 9/11 and this is why you're going to buy American, right? So like everyone's Black, everyone's Hispanic, everyone's Asian, everyone's white. We're not going to have 4 different efforts, but we're going to tap into that one core that unifies us all. And so I think that the next evolution is, how do we unite using that brand without being, too salesy, if you will. And so I think there's some work that needs to be done. But all of this is somewhat philosophical at this point, as brands are really trying to struggle, with the exception of maybe Clorox and Lysol, who are the basic winners in this whole thing, right?
Charmin.
Yeah, exactly. But and then they've got and then they also have to figure out PR, because it's like you can't have leadership say, oh, you can just ingest it or intravenous it, and then you'll be all gone. The virus will go away. That in itself is a crisis. So you've got to also have PR, kind of, on the side and ready to go and address the crisis when you don't know, what it is, and you have to do it in real time.
Here's a question that I'm thinking of as you're talking.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've been thinking about this idea when you have a situation like this where I think things have calmed down a little bit, but there's still a scarcity issue, right? Like you go to a store and you're not necessarily going to find your brand. Definitely not of toilet paper. People are buying just whatever, but it may be peanut butter. It may be cleaner, right? Maybe you were very brand loyal to Lysol or, whatever disinfectant wipes, but now you have to buy whatever's on the shelf. And this is happening, right? This is happening continuously every week that you go to the store or however often. And they say that, it takes 30 days for a new habit to form.
Mm.
Do you think this change in purchase behavior, right? Kind of purchasing, you for sure, I think the majority of consumers are purchasing brands that they've never purchased before. Do you think this is going to have an effect on brand loyalty in the long term? Or do you think after this is done, people are going to revert back to the brands that they purchased prior to this crisis?
So that's a fantastic question. I'm glad you've asked it. I haven't heard anybody ask that question, and I think this is a definite sort of implication or outcome out of this COVID-19. I think that initially, right, when the supply chain started, I don't want to say the supply chain was drying up, but when the shelves were going empty, people started freaking out, and they were buying, products that they were never consuming. Like I saw, all of the barbecue oysters next to the sardines and next to the anchovies. And it's like, Americans eat all that stuff for real, right? Like that was like unheard of, right? But
yeah,
that's very extreme. And so if you can't find Lay's potato chips, guess what? The store brand will do, especially if it's $2.79 for a family pack and you've got nothing else. And I think this is a really good point that you're bringing up, because I think those that are brand loyal and are not price sensitive will go back to those products. Now, those switchers, right? They're the ones that are like, those are the ones that I would worry about, because those are the ones that I'm reaching, possibly persuading, and possibly getting them closer to brand loyalty. And all of a sudden, here's a circumstance that I have no control over, where people are buying the competition just because they've had no other option available. So I think that whatever gains that brands have made, for some consumers, they're going to have to double down and work more harder to get them back. A brand loyal customer is a brand loyal customer, right? So unless we're in the Great Recession, I think brand loyalty is still a very relevant concept. I think the brands that lost some might have slipped with those switchers and people that are occasional buyers.
Yeah. So essentially, if I'm kind of reiterate what you're saying, is that switchers are going to be switchers and brand loyalists are going to be brand loyalists, but there is the potential for some of the switchers to stay in whatever brand that they chose. They might continue that, but ultimately, people that are brand loyal are going to be brand loyal after all this.
I think so. I think it's my take.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because it makes me think, post all this, are we going to start to see campaigns? I don't know if it's a big enough phenomenon. I mean, this is something we haven't looked into this. But I wonder if there'll be campaigns kind of bringing people back. Like, hey, remember us? You tried that other guy, but you remember us? Come back.
Yeah, well, I think this is where marketing deserves some sophistication, right? Because a lot of brands that I've worked with in the past, and even now, their main objective is to grow subscriptions or to grow, widgets, or to get more people to buy your product. So it's all about growth. But the question is, how are you going to grow, right? Are you tapping your loyal base, which is the easiest thing to do, right? I mean, if I have 2 boys, and my boys, as a family, we consume 4 quarts of milk a week out of 7 days. So guess what? If you gave me an offer, or if you spoke to me in a very different way, I might buy a fifth, right? Because I'm already there. The question is, and so my point is, brands have to identify where their growth is coming from. If they're going after switchers, then you've got to say, remember them, now remember us, right? So like, I have to acknowledge your current behavior so that I can tell you, don't do that, buy me and do this, right? So that's a very different strategy than saying we're number one, right? So, I don't know, Mario, to be honest, that all brands are willing to think in those finite terms. Because I've seen campaigns, and you've seen campaigns for decades now, right? The CPGs understand that. I'm not so sure that every category operates within that framework, right? So automotive doesn't think that way. They're about deals, brands, what they stand for. They're not targeting, hey, you used to be a Subaru customer, now come to Ford. Never seen anything like that. Whereas for categories like the CPG, even the wireless, they're thinking in different terms.
Now that's interesting, because I was even thinking about CPG, but because that's the world that thinks about marketing in those terms. And you're right, there's an opportunity for other verticals to think about that. But jumping around, I'm pretty sure we've discussed this, this idea out there in the marketplace that Latinos are more brand loyal. We've done some research on that. That's not true.
Yeah.
I know we've had some really good discussions on that. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how that idea came to be and where we're at?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, we can look at, there's enough past that we can sort of discuss where we are today and where we want to be, right? And so I believe that a lot of these simplified concepts, if not these sort of, social constructs, were created in a sense to validate Hispanic marketing back in the early 90s. And so the more unique we made, the more differentiated we made this consumer, the more we can validate our siloed effort. So if Latinos were they had a language preference of Spanish, if they were culturally homogeneous, if they were brand loyal, you started checking off all these boxes and said, oh my God, they're fastest growing segment, that the largest ethnic segment, they have over $1 trillion. Now it's 1.6 or 7 trillion, right? So you've got all these like amazing facts. And I think brand loyalty came into that sort of framework. Now, here's what I think, and this is based on a lot of research. When you think about your consideration set, the brands that you're considering to buy, if you just listed the first, list all of the potato chip companies that you can think of, you'll exhaust yourself after 4 or 5. Those are the brands in your consideration set. Okay, now. When you just get here as a foreign-born, as a low acculturated, with limited exposure to America, you have a different kind of consideration set, and you have different brands in there, and you have much fewer brands than you would if you were to compare yourself to a U.S. born or someone here who's been second or third generation. So I could see how brand loyalty plays into a consideration set that's scarce, because you don't know much. You know less than your peers. So if Colgate is talking to you and you use Colgate back in your country of origin, then guess what? Maybe that's the one that you're going to buy. The more you the higher, the more that you acculturate, the more you integrate, and the more you learn about brands, and you start playing around with your consideration set, and you start trying out brands. That's when it gets all murky, and that's where you're like, oh, I don't have to go with Colgate when Crest gives me greater efficiency or effectiveness, and doctors validate it, right? It's no longer about the smile; it's about dental hygiene. So you start learning about new brands, and you start changing your purchasing behavior. So the reality is, it's not one or the other. You can start with some brands, and then you'll evolve as a result of adding more brands into your consideration set. And I think that's kind of like a very neuromarketing way to look at it, and I think it's very accurate. But I think this whole notion of Hispanics being brand loyal has been refused or debunked rather, by a number of studies. And I would also argue, in one of the studies what we did, we looked at CSD, the beverage category, carbonated beverage category. And so even within different categories, there might be different levels of brand loyalty. So we've got to look at those kinds of factors also.
Yeah, and I think kind of bringing it back to what's happening now, I think it's an opportunity for brands. I'm with you with the brand loyalty idea that after this, people are going to revert back to their brands. However, I do think, given how much consumer habits have changed or consumer behavior, right? And outside of brand preference, I mean, where you're ordering, how you're ordering, what stores you're going to. I think it's going to be really a golden age for market research in terms of figuring out where did consumers end up after all of this, right? I mean, where are they buying? I think we're going to see a fundamental shift in consumer behavior that brands are going to have to kind of reckon with after all this.
Yeah, I think the distribution of purchase is really an immediate has immediate implications, right? Because we've been sort of we've taken ourselves out of this experiential location, right? These retail outlets, they're not just selling their products, but they're also selling an experience. So are we going to go back? Are we dying to go back and experience that? Or are we happy with the Amazons and getting things delivered to us directly, via online shopping? So I think it's too early to tell. I don't know that it's going to swing one way or the other. I do think I think that the most immediate effect in the short term is that people will want to get out. And then so brands, I think, have to staff up and make sure they've got product. And I think that people will want to go out with masks and gloves and whatever else, with all of those precautions. I think people will want to change their current situation. I think in the end, I think it'll all normalize.
Let's hope so, and I think that's a good endpoint here. We've referenced lots of studies, a lot of work that we've done together, some work that you've done with other partners. The journal is a great resource for that. If people want to find the journal, subscribe, where can they find that stuff, Jake?
So it's www. So Henry Stewart Publications is the publisher. If you just Google them and look for the Journal of Cultural Marketing Strategy. It's been around for 5 years, Mario. So thank you for being a founding sponsor for the journal and for the work that you've done, and you've allowed us to fill on those pages. Without you and a lot of other folks, this would have been just a conceptual dream more than a reality. So happy to say that this May, a month from now or a couple of days from now, we will be looking at a 5-year anniversary. So, find us on the net under the Journal of Cultural Marketing Strategy, and enjoy it. It's worth your time and money.
Thanks for stopping by, Jake.
I appreciate you, man. Continue doing the great work that you're doing.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform. Final thank you to our producer, Lucas Martinez, who created our intro music and makes our podcast sound great. To To email him, reach out to martinez.lucas.a@gmail.com.